You believe in Jesus? Yes, I do. Well, you're going to meet him.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Steel Creed, where we connect faith and reason to ordinary experience by steel-manning aspects of Christendom. Today, we will be discussing the conceptual landscape, and joining me, as always, is my good friend Nate.
Greetings, Ian. Greetings, listeners, and greetings, fellow heretics. Looking forward to our discussion today.
All right, so let's jump right in. Well, as we teased last time, the first episode of Steel Creed is called the Conceptual Landscape. So, why are we calling it that? And the answer is that what we are trying to do with this episode is to explain how we are thinking about and how we are approaching different topics in Christendom, the creed in particular, but also things that underlie the creed and really come before it. And so I suppose the first thing to observe is that, I don't know about you, Nate, but to me, when you go to a church, if you don't know anything about church, if you're an alien, for instance, that comes to Earth and says, what's Christianity all about? It appears to be, at least in my mind, it appears to be this very strange social club where the cost of admission is affirming all sorts of strange sounding things.
And 10%.
And 10%, right. Exactly. Which is why taxation is really theft, because they take so much more. But anyway, so you have these. You're affirming the existence. I mean, you could really go back to George Carlin.
Think about it. Religion has actually convinced people that there's an invisible man living in the sky who watches everything you do every minute of every day. And the invisible man has a special list of 10 things he does not want you to do. And if you do any of these 10 things, he has a special place full of fire and smoke and burning and torture and anguish where he will send you to live and suffer and burn and choke and scream and cry forever and ever till the end of time. But he loves you.
He's got an interesting point, right? Like, because I think that's how a fair number of people outside of the church might view the beliefs in the church. And so the point of this episode is to frame these things appropriately. So to start with, I think it should be observed that we will not be proving Christianity. I'm not going to prove to you that God exists. We're not going to prove God's love to you, but rather, instead of grounding the show in the idea of truth, we're going to ground the idea of the show in action.
I think that's awesome.
Why, thank you.
I think.
Why do you think that's awesome, Nate?
Well, I think any field of discussion or debate in our society is always looking for the truth based on the facts, right? And Christianity is nothing different,
I mean, that's what they're doing, right? They're looking.
It's allegedly, but it's what they say they're doing.
It's what they say they're doing. They're following the science, but the question is following it where? Like, what are you going to do with that science?
And in Christianity, we don't call it following the science, but we go, he's like, well, we have this book, for example, the Bible, and here's the 17,000 reasons you can trust that it's true because we've proven it's true.
Right.
And, there's 400 prophecies fulfilled by Jesus Christ. Therefore, it's true. And you go down the list of here's all the reasons why you should believe that this is true. You never necessarily ask yourself, why would I want to believe it's true?
Why do I care?
Or why do I care? Yeah.
And I think that's like a question that a lot of people bring up with respect to Christendom. It's like, you have all these weird beliefs. What does it matter? Who cares? And in fact, I think that's a reasonable question. And so I don't even really, I suppose maybe we could talk about this when we talk about evangelism with respect to the Great Commission, but it's not even clear to me why you should even bother trying to evangelize a person who doesn't care. It's like, hey, look, man, if everything is going swimmingly in your life, I really don't have anything to offer you. Now, literally, that's not true, because I really think it's the case that, well, one, nothing goes perfectly swimmingly in a person's life 100% all of the time. So I dismiss that as veneer. But I suppose the other thing is that even if it is, just wait a little while. Wait 6 months to a year. Something's going to go wrong somewhere that's going to cause you to think through the underlying assumptions that you have. But all that to say that we are grounding this in the idea of action. So it's not the case that we don't think truth is important. Truth is very important. But it should be observed that truth is not the aim. The aim is action. And so, and I think that I can give the easiest case in the world for that by just pointing out that, Milton Friedman observed that inflation is everywhere and always a monetary phenomenon, and humans are everywhere and always choosing creatures. Is that you can discuss and you can debate and you can say whether or not you think certain things are true. But you always have to choose. You always have to live your life. And those choices are based on something. And so what is that something?
And I think Jesus even talks about that, where in John 15, he tells his disciples, if you love me, you'll obey what I command.
Right.
So to a certain extent, action is what Jesus is after, to a certain extent.
And of course, there's the book of James, which, as we know, Martin Luther loved.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a funny one. But, there really is an interaction, and we'll talk about this later down the road in the show, is like, what is faith? There's pistos and there's pistis and two Greek words that get used, and,
Well, since you brought them up, and I don't know what you're talking about, why don't you define them for the listening audience?
Yeah, so pistis is just kind of the noun, I think, in Greek, where it's just like, it's just like the noun for faith. Okay. And then the word pistos is more of like the adjective, like faithful. You're faithful to this, faithful to that. I call you to live a faithful life, for example. So it's kind of like faith is a verb, or in the famous words of DC Talk, love is a verb. So.
And I love rap music.
Yes, always have and always will. So, but anyway, I guess we're getting a little far afield. You want to just
getting off track? Well, okay, so. Right, so man is always a choosing creature. And so what is instructing that choice? And so I think it's useful to provide one of the following partitions of thought, and that is to partition thought between facts and values. Okay, so when we talk about facts, getting back to our favorite phrase from 2020, follow the science. Facts are what is. When you're trying to do science, that's really what scientists are trying to do, is they are trying to uncover what is. That's their purview. And so it's what is, it's what you know, and it's a particular way of viewing reality. And it's the idea of viewing reality as a landscape of information. And so you go outside, your senses take in information, and so they take in that grass is green and the sky is blue, and the concrete is gray, and all sorts of things like that, right? That acceleration due to gravity is 9.81 meters per second squared, that water boils at 100 degrees Celsius, that the body temperature is 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, so on. It's just what is. And like we said, that is the purview of science, because what science is always trying to do is to first of all observe and record all of these facts, and then to extract a smaller set of facts that is used to explain all of the observed facts from deductions. And so that's facts. But that's not the whole story, because again, going back to follow the science, follow it where? What are you going to do with it?
I think that's the interesting thing, is people will take the same data set, and you could say that they could be data sets that are, just it's almost impossible to argue that these are they're observed facts, and they draw completely different conclusions and different ways of acting on those data sets.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, again, going back to 2020 is a great year with respect to that observation. You've got the data with respect to COVID. What do you do with it? Clearly, people did different things with it. And so, that was also, the summer of love. So why did some people look at arrest statistics, say, and see racism, and other people look at arrest statistics and go, nope, no racism here? And then obviously they acted very differently.
Well, I would almost say the way that they wanted to act predetermined how they viewed the data.
Well,
and you could say that for both sides.
I think ultimately that's what was going on underneath. I think that the data was the warrant for that which they already wanted to do. In general, it's never clear to me why, whether you love the cops or hate the cops, if you don't like the cops, why are you wrecking stores? One doesn't immediately follow from the other in my own mind, but hey, that's just me. But anyway, the point is, when you said what they want to do, well, that leads us to the second piece of the partition, which is values. So it's not the case that reality is merely a landscape of information. Man is an acting creature. He's a volitional creature. And so values it's what ought. Instead of what is, it's what ought. And it's what you want. And so perhaps you want to have a better paying job. You want to date the hot girl or the hot guy or whatever. You want a faster car, you want a bigger house, whatever it is. And instead of viewing reality as a landscape of information, viewing reality through the lens of value is viewing reality as a theater for action. And the purview of values is morality, because that's the whole point of having ethical discussions. It's like the classic trolley problem, right? What ought you to do in this situation? The facts are plain. There's, depending on the formulation, you see one person is tied to one of the railroad tracks and 5 people are tied to the other railroad track. The facts are plain, but the trolley problem is a question of, well, what should you do in that situation? Should you flip the lever? Should you do nothing? Should you whatever?
And it's, we say it's the purview of morality, which means it's not the purview of science. It's a different arena to a certain extent.
Well, right, because science doesn't tell you what to do with any of the facts. And in fact, I would even say that values precede facts, because one question you might ask is, why even bother observing facts? And how do you, and we'll get to this shortly, but how do you even select among facts? Yes.
So what is the interaction then between facts and values?
Well, I think the naive way of thinking about the connection between facts and values then is that there is I think the way people think people operate is what I refer to as a naive model of human action. And so in this model, what you have is you have the things at which you're aiming: more money, hot spouse, big
spiritual
house.
Fulfillment, potentially.
Yeah, that too. But I'm more interested in the money, in the hot spouse. I'm a simple man, Nate. Wine, women, and song. There are the things that you value, and those are the things at which you aim, and then you use the facts at hand in order to obtain them. And so the facts are the foundation for action to achieve that in which you're interested, that at which you aim, that which you value. And I think that that's roughly, if you just stopped, I'm speaking from pure experience on my part, if you stopped and talked to people on the street, that's how they think people operate. Is that, well, what are we trying to do? What do we know? Okay, let's have at it. And so, you might say, well, why do I refer to that as naive? And my answer is that it's because there's too many facts. And so even just with science itself, it's not that science is trying to sort out every last fact in the universe, right? No scientists, so right now we're in your living room. No scientists are in your living room right now counting the fibers in the carpet. No one cares. No one cares about the weight of the tongue and groove wood flooring here. No one cares how many bricks are in the chimney. I imagine the architect did at one point in time when he was constructing the house, but now I don't think anyone cares. And I think the best example I have of the claim that there are, quote, too many facts comes from the movie Powers of 10. So Powers of 10 is a movie that was made originally in 1968, and then sort of redone in 1977. And brother, it looks like it was made in 1977.
It does.
But it's a great movie nonetheless, and you can, the listener can find it on YouTube. I highly recommend it. We'll put that in the show notes. But it starts with a man and a woman picnicking in a park in Chicago, and I believe they're relatively close to the University of Chicago. And what happens in this film is that the camera backs out. So it starts off, kind of hovering over them, and they're just, I don't know, they're eating sandwiches or whatever. And the camera starts to pull away, and the camera pulls away at a rate of, it's a power of 10 every 10 seconds. And so you're seeing the couple, and then you're seeing kind of like, the ground around them.
And then it's like meters squared, right? Isn't it it starts off being like a,
yeah, I believe
something like
so.
that.
Yeah. I think it's, of course it is, because it's science. It's a metric system. As an aside, I don't know how it got past. Well, yeah, I do, because I don't watch it. But there was an episode of SNL where they had George Washington come give an inspirational speech to his men. And he says,
distance will be measured in inches, feet, yard, and mile. So 12 inches to a foot?
12 feet to a yard.
If it were only so simple. 3 feet to a yard.
And how many yards to a mile?
Nobody knows.
and it just goes on like that. But anyway, the point is, so you see the couple, you see the park, you see, a few city blocks, you see the city. You're backing out, you're seeing most of Chicago, you're seeing the lakefront. Now you're seeing most of Illinois, part of Michigan. Now you're seeing the Midwest, the eastern half of the country, North America. And it just keeps backing out, and the narrator's talking about what's observable at these different scales, right? And at some point, of course, because this is 1977, it becomes artist renditions of what they think is out there as opposed to actual footage. It goes out and then eventually starts to go back in and zoom in on the couple. And then it starts zooming closer and closer in. And then you start seeing, the fibers of fabric in the clothes. And then you're seeing things at the cellular level. And then you're seeing things at the atomic level. And again, artist rendition, physical models, that sort of thing. But the thrust of it is, wow, what a complicated world. What an interesting world. There's a lot to discover. But everyone who watches this film ought to walk away with a feeling of humility. Is that when you think about how much there is and how much you can actually contain in your head, there's so much more of what is than what you might conceive of.
Absolutely.
And so I think it's incorrect to say that, oh yeah, I just amass all the facts that I need, and then I act, and then I either hit my target or I miss. And so I think it's important to realize it's not really the case that you're just standing on this foundation of facts, but rather what you're doing is you have facts at your disposal, which I think is actually a small amount of that on which your action is predicated. But really, most of the things on which you act are assumptions. And so, for instance, right now we're recording this in your house. And right now I'm assuming that my house, for instance, still exists. So between the time that I left my house and came over here, it could have easily burned down. I'm assuming that my car is still in your driveway. It might have been stolen.
High possibility for where we live.
That's true. I'm assuming that my bank account has not been compromised and all the money absconded with to some third world nation. Although I did try to buy a lot of computer parts earlier this evening, and despite my best efforts, my bank kept swatting me. So I might owe Newegg a lot of money on Monday morning.
That's hilarious.
On the bright side, it did confirm that my debit card works.
And I think that too, like what you're saying with assumptions, even goes into to life. Like we have a 1-year-old, and I'm operating under the assumption she's upstairs sleeping in her crib, and I'm assuming that she's breathing and perfectly okay. But yeah, it's just like you do that with people too. You assume that your parents are doing okay. You assume that your child is doing okay.
Yeah.
And all those types of things. And those are assumptions that you're just operating by.
Yeah, we're assuming
constantly.
that this equipment's going to continue to work as we record this. The power's not going to go out. We're making all sorts of assumptions with what we're doing. And so I think a more, we'll say, sophisticated model of human action is that, no, it's not the case that facts are a foundation on which you act to achieve that which you value. Rather, what's really the case is that there's a small amount of facts that you know, and then the rest is just buttressed by a bunch of assumptions that you make, most of which you probably don't even realize you're making. You're just going about your business, not even realizing it. Okay, so that's a slightly more sophisticated model of human action. But I'm going to take it and make it slightly more sophisticated.
So right now we have facts and assumptions as the basis of this.
Yes. Yeah, the naive model, facts is everything, right? You just, boom, we know everything we need to know, and we use that to achieve that in which we're interested, which is roughly how most math classes go. It's like, this, and this. Prove this. Okay. But, real life, I mean, I don't know how your life has been, but it seems slightly more complicated than that.
Of course.
Yeah, making all sorts of assumptions. Okay. So, but then I'm going to take assumptions, I'm going to split it into two more categories. And so I'm going to split it between hypotheses, and I'm going to split between hypotheses and faith. And so what you might observe with the previous examples I gave of assumptions, my house not being burned down, my car in your driveway, my bank account not being compromised, is that if I really wanted to know, I'd go and look. I'd walk out your front door. Yep, the car's there. What about the house? Well, I'd drive back home. I'd go and look at. I'd go back. Yep, house is still there. Or nope, smoking ruins. Okay, well, gotta give the old insurance company a call. If I was interested in whether or not my account had been compromised, I would just log in. Yep, okay, there's the money. Okay, yep, there are the computer parts I was supposed to buy, that sort of thing. But in each one of these cases, yeah, there are assumptions, but, if put to it, if I really wanted to figure it out, I can imagine.
You could turn them from assumptions into facts.
Yeah,
So they could cross the line.
Exactly. I could verify them. And I think, and so I refer to that as being, hypotheses are fact-based tests. They're assumptions you make where you go, look, if I really wanted to know, I'd go and look. I can figure it out. I can imagine a way I would figure it out. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to interrupt what we're doing right now and go out and look in your driveway. I'm not going to drive back home. But I can at least imagine how I would do it, right? And I think this is an important, slight aside to this, but I think this is important. When people talk about their own truth, Like, well, that's your truth. This is my truth. Well, what do they mean by that? Well, I think what they mean by it is that for every person and any fact that you present to them, or rather proposition that you present to them, every person is going to have their own set of tests to which they will subject that proposition. And so it may very easily be the case that the set of tests to which I subject a proposition is going to be different than yours. And so in that sense, a fact might be true to me because it passed all tests, or a proposition might be true to me and therefore accepted as a fact because it passes all tests. But for you, perhaps it doesn't pass all of your tests.
And in that way, and this might be what you're saying, but in a certain way, facts are all relative to a certain extent. For example, you might get someone who still believes the earth is flat.
Yeah.
There's no matter how many quote unquote facts you present to them
Right.
to prove them quote unquote wrong, they're not going to change their mind.
Right.
And they're going to say they're living their life like the earth is flat, but whatever, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some better examples that you could come up with.
Yeah.
But to that point about acceleration due to gravity,
Sure.
we quote unquote know it's 9.81 meters per second. I've never done an experiment to verify that.
Nope. But you can imagine that different people would perform different experiments. And then some people, of course, would throw a feather in the air and say, well, why isn't this falling at 9.81 meters per second squared? And then you go, well, there's drag and it's a second order differential equation and all this good stuff. But, I mean, come on. Surely when you were a kid in elementary school and you learned every object fell at the same rate, did you guys do the tests?
I do. I don't remember when I did it. I remember thinking, wow, this changes everything. Like you have that feeling as a kid. You're like, if this was a vacuum and there was no air, they would both fall at the same rate. There's like when you're a kid, I don't know if that was in middle school or when we learned about that specific thing, but it kind of blows your mind a little bit because it goes against your experience. Like as a kid, it
doesn't go against your experience. It goes against your intuition.
Sure, but your experience is if I drop two things, the heavier thing's going to fall faster.
That's not your experience.
Okay, it's intuition, but the thing is if you're a kid, you're gonna.
That's child's intuition. That's the point.
Yeah, but if a child does that experiment based on their matrix of values, they're going to take two things and they're going to drop them at the same time.
Yeah.
And one's going to drop faster.
That's what they think is going to happen.
Well, if you drop a feather.
Well, okay, but the feather is the counterexample.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just saying, just generally, if you drop two things that are not, of different mass or shape, one's going to fall before the other. And a kid is most of the time going to be able to, quote unquote, they're going to be able to guess which one's going to fall to the ground first.
But here's the thing. But this is the fun part, right? So then how would you, okay, so let's have some fun with this. So you got the kid. He says, hey man, the feather's falling slower, right? How do you prove to the kid that no, the principle still is the same. It's the drag. And you can't talk to a 6-year-old about second order differential equations.
Well, I think you have to probably start somewhere like, well, there's nothing between here and the ground. There's air. There's gas in between here and the ground, and that gas has some mass, and it's getting in the way of that feather falling more than it's getting in the way of the ball falling. I think you have to start with something like that.
Okay, I guess I was thinking just find an object that weighs as much as a feather. Then,
that would be a good one too.
And then just drop that with the
and that's
ball.
something that might be easier to check. Like, let's find two things that weigh mostly the same and see if weight has anything to do with it. Right. And if you can prove that weight doesn't have anything to do with it, then there must be another factor that we're not accounting for.
But that's the whole point, right? Is that right now, what are we doing? We're coming up with different tests to verify or to affirm or deny a certain proposition. And so the point is, it's tangential to what we're doing in this episode, but I think it's an important one. Is that I think sometimes, especially I've seen this in Christendom when people are talking about apologetic matters, is they dismiss that idea of the relativity of truth out of hand. They're like, no, man, truth is absolute. If you deny that absolute truth exists, that's an absolute proposition, and you've just contradicted yourself. And that's a literally true statement. It is true that if you deny absolute truth, that's a self-contradicting statement. And yet, most people act as though truth is relative. So you're missing something. What is it? What are you missing when you dismiss the idea that truth is relative out of hand? What you're dismissing is that the people who make that claim are just being insufficiently precise with the statement of the claim. Of course, truth is truth. The question is, what are the tests to which you're subjecting it? And the tests are relative to the person.
And to get to Christendom specifically, you have maybe this concept where this could show up is just like, oh, there's primary doctrines and there's secondary doctrines. There's primary things we have to agree on, and there's secondary things that we can have our own opinions about. But then the question comes like, why or who made the delineator between those two things?
Yeah, that's a really good question.
And why would I accept the concept of there being things we can't agree about and things we can't disagree about?
Yeah,
those are two. Those you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So I mean, when we talk about truth is relative, that happens in religion. It happens within the same religion to a certain extent.
Of course, it happens everywhere. I mean, like, again, discard Christendom for a moment. Think about your own job. Are you telling me that looking at the same set of facts, everyone in the room just agrees on what's true?
That never happens in the professional world.
That never happens. That never happens. That's why whenever you're making a big decision in a company, you bring in your own analysis. You go, wow, I looked at this, that, and the other thing. And what happens in the conversation? Someone goes, yeah, but what about this and this and this and this? And you're like,
we did the funny thing at work this week where we did the yearly employee survey. And I've learned something, and this is very off topic. I guess
we really should have invested in SurveyMonkey like 20 years ago.
I know. And what's interesting to me, I had a work colleague from a former job guy. I would call him a mentor. And one of the places he used to work, the owner of the company, like once a month or once a quarter, he would bring everyone into a room. So he had like 20, 30 people, the people who were running the company in the room.
Okay, so like a relatively small company.
Yeah, relatively small company.
Okay, yeah.
And they would just get everything out on the table and hash it out. They would look at the financial statements, and they would just hash it out. And he's like, people quit and got fired in this meeting all the time.
Really?
Yeah. But the cool thing is you always knew the owner was just very honest and blunt, and he wanted everything on the table.
Yeah.
So if you held something back, you were going to get exposed.
Okay.
If you were lying, you were going to get exposed. You know, and then problems got exposed faster too.
Sure.
And so, I've been in the professional world for a long time now, and obviously it took 2 or 3 years for me to realize that employee surveys were total bullcrap.
What?
And so,
are you saying that people lie on a survey?
No, I'm saying that the people who are offering the survey, and this is, if you're not directly asking your employees personally what they think, then I don't think you care what they think. And that's from watching. No,
that's a fair statement.
Watching, like, in my previous company, the employee surveys always complained about the same things, had the same types of comments.
Yeah.
And they, instead of the higher level management blaming themselves, they would always blame something else.
Sure.
And then I just realized, well, this is pointless.
I don't like taking responsibility for things.
Yeah. and that's the point. Like, it's like you can literally have someone tell you exactly what they're mad about.
Mm-hmm.
And you can find a way to convince yourself that they're not mad about it.
Right. Yeah. You just generate a new test. You go,
we'll do the survey again in 6 months.
Yeah. Well, but what about this? Yeah, that's also, of course, why the scientific method is so important, is that all parties agree. You're stating up front, okay, what are we going to take as evidence of this hypothesis, or really evidence against it, since science is essentially a negative kind of endeavor. What are we going to take as evidence against the hypothesis? We all agree? Okay, let's move forward. Yeah, that's how you know a disingenuous interlocutor is when when you answer all of their queries, they go, yeah, what about this? It's like, I think you have the conclusion in mind, and you'll just generate tests till the end of time in order to avoid the conclusion. But anyway, okay, so that's how truth is relative, and that's what hypotheses are. So since we got off track a little bit, let's re.
So we've talked about
reevaluate.
hypotheses, and those are things
we're splitting assumptions into hypotheses and faith. And so hypotheses are the things for which you can posit a fact-based test. Like, I'm not going to do it, but if you put a gun to my head, I could figure out how I'm going to check and see whether or not this thing's true, at the very least to my own liking. Okay, so what is faith? And I define faith is an assumption for which you cannot posit a fact-based test. And you might say, well, that's a little odd. What do you mean you cannot posit a fact-based test? But again, just as with truth being relative, in the sense that the set of tests that you would need to satisfy to affirm a proposition in your own mind, maybe it's the case that you cannot imagine a test. And so here are a few examples. And again, because it's relative, they're faith
Ian's.
for me. Yeah, it's mine. But the first is that Nate exists. So, ChatGPT has come online. Google Bard is now. I'm enjoying Bard a little bit more than ChatGPT. Have you messed around with either of these?
I haven't messed around with anything in the last couple months, and it's just like any other technology, right? The original is going to it probably already has been surpassed by many other models by this point. And now you have all this stuff with OpenAI where their company's falling apart and they just fired their CEO and whatnot.
Oh, they really?
Yeah. It's a huge fight. The board fired the CEO and all the employees said, we're going to go work for Microsoft if you don't reinstate them. So they're a total mess. Whatever they're doing, they're not doing a lot of great work right now because they're, in a mess. So,
all that technology, and they still can't solve basic human problems.
Yeah, human interaction.
What does this say about mankind?
So you're saying one test that you can't is, do I exist?
Yeah, does Nate exist? So maybe Nate's this really well-formed automaton. Oh, shucks. Oh, Descartes, right, yeah. The only thing of which Descartes could apparently be convinced is that he exists. I think, therefore I am. But Nate, I don't know. Maybe he's just a really good-looking robot. Okay. But nonetheless, I assume that there is another personality named Nate. In the Martin Buber sense of I and thou, I'm convinced of an I, but I assume that there's a thou, and I'm not really sure how I could test that out. And in general, I think that the existence of other people, not only the existence of other people, but the motives and the intentions and the personality of other people. I think you make faith statements all the time. And so, for instance, you're a married man. Do you suppose that your wife loves you? She's upstairs right now. Be very careful how you answer this question.
Yes.
That's the correct answer. Would it make a difference if you thought she didn't?
It absolutely would. And I think talking about these two things we're splitting out, hypotheses and faith, when you're talking about relationships, you base your relationships off of confirmed hypotheses a lot, but there's also a faith aspect to it to a certain extent.
There's absolutely a faith aspect it's because we typically think of human beings as volitional. It might not be the case, but we think of the laws of nature as fixed, and we are always discovering and refining them. But people, I'm constantly assuming that you're not going to pull a weapon on me and jump across the table and take me out. And if I didn't think that was the case, I would have drawn my weapon at this point. So it really is the case that when you're interacting with people, much of those interactions are faith-based, because I can't peer inside of you, and you can't peer inside of your wife, and we can't look into the consciousness of another person and really understand who they are. And so, for instance, a listener might be listening to this and say, you guys, Ian, you're coming up with stupid examples. Maybe I know that my wife loves me. She cooks me breakfast and, gives me a kiss and does the laundry, whatever. Okay, fine. Well, what about when you ask your friend his biggest fear, and he says that my greatest fear is that I become like my father? Well, how are you going to test that? Are you going to, sit in the bushes outside of his house and record all of his actions and go, seems like you're kind of acting like your dad sometimes. I'm not so sure that you really fear that, Mm-hmm. No, you either take him at his word or you don't. And depending on how you interact with him, if you take him at his word versus you don't, surely how future interactions will change depending on whether you affirm or deny that particular proposition, right? And so I think the way I've typically summarized it is that the ubiquity of personality demonstrates the necessity of faith. Is that because you're surrounded by personalities, none of which you can fully understand, you're lucky to understand yourself. You're constantly making faith statements.
And I think from an internal sense, not from an interpersonal sense, but just from the personal sense, the other big one is just life. Is life worth living?
Right.
How are you going to prove something like that?
Yeah. In a million years, what's it going to matter? Right. Like when that's often what you say right before you do something stupid. And I don't know if I do that. In a million years, what's it going to matter? Well, what if it does? And I think whether you affirm or deny that statement, in a million years will it matter, it changes how you live. Because maybe it matters greatly. Maybe it's the case that if you take responsibility for everything that you do, the world looks very different at the end of your life than if you don't.
I think from the scientists or the scientism, they talk about, I don't know what the exact number is, but in 30 billion years, all the stars are going to blink out.
Right, and the sun's going to explode and take out Earth.
And it's going to happen in this certain amount of time, and it's inevitable. Well, that's totally a faith-based, belief. It can't be proven. You might say that the mathematical and physical properties of the world would suggest that it might happen in that time period if nothing else changes.
Right.
But who are you to just assume that that's the way it's going to be?
Well, that's actually an interesting point, and I think that statements, future-oriented statements, as well as prehistoric statements, both fall into this murky area. And the reason it's murky is because I think technically some people will take those statements as hypotheses and other people will take them as faith. And here's the reason why, is because, the sun blowing up and taking out the earth or whatever, where does that come from? It comes from physical models. There's a set of equations that we think dictates how celestial bodies operate. We run the models. We let t go to infinity. We let time run out. And as t gets large, we realize, okay, well, according to this model, I don't even know the estimates. In 100 billion years, some astronomical thing that I can't even imagine. Although our national debt is bigger than that. Astronomical thing I can't even imagine. The sun takes out the earth. Now, is it a faith statement or is that a hypothesis? Well, it depends. If the test that you posit for the affirmation of the proposition is, what does the physical model say? Then it's a hypothesis. But if you're like me and you go, Man's made all sorts of physical models all throughout his lifetime. Let's have a dollop of humility here. I take those things as faith.
Well, that's really important, because when that happens, if someone's coming at it from a hypothesis to fact stance, and someone is approaching it from a faith-based stance, you're not going to be on the same playing field or the same plane when you're trying to have a discussion about it.
Right, unless you state up front what the set of tests are.
That's true.
Yeah, if you state up front, if I come to you and I say, I only care about the outcome of the equations of the physical models, and you say, that's insufficient for me. Okay, well, we really can't proceed then, because we can't agree on the facts at hand.
And I think you made this point earlier, that this happens with discussions about religion. For example, if you think sin is no big deal, or if it doesn't really matter if there's a God or not, then there's not necessarily a point in trying to have a discussion about it.
Well, there's absolutely no point. But I would say those are value-based things. No big deal, and it doesn't matter, are value judgments. And yeah, that goes back to the opening point, which is that, if the existence of God, if it's not clear to you why God's existence, affirmed or denied, changes your behavior, then that it's a stupid question to even pursue. That's right up. That's why we have the phrase, well, what does that have to do with the price of tea in China?
And I think that will be interesting as we get into some of those conversations. Like next time, we're going to do the existence of God.
Indeed, we are.
And it's going to be very interesting to see the landscape that we set up for that discussion, and see like what does it take to get in there, what puts you outside of it potentially, at least from the perspective that we're having the conversation from.
Right. Now, my claim is that, and we'll see this next time, is that whether you affirm or deny the existence of God absolutely makes a difference. And it makes a difference, I think, to most people, even if it's not immediately clear to them that it does. But nonetheless, that's roughly how these things are structured. Okay, so I think two more examples I want to give of faith, because since you're a father now, I think it's worth going through. I believe you'll probably try to teach these to your children. You'll probably tell them that honesty is the best policy.
Yeah, to a certain extent, that's self-serving, is it not, as a parent? But sure, absolutely.
Because it's not immediately clear that it is sometimes.
There's definitely times when lying totally is, from a child's perspective.
Never mind a child's perspective.
From anyone's perspective.
You've never wanted to lie to your wife? Again, be careful.
No, I absolutely have wanted to lie or withhold. I think the biggest thing sometimes in marriage is not outright lying, but it's withholding information.
Sins of omission.
Yeah.
Great Testament song. Yeah. Again, not immediately obvious that it is the best policy. And yet, how you answer the question changes how you behave. And then the other one is, hard work pays off, right?
That is, especially the more you go through your professional career, it's just natural, and it's because of human relationships. You're going to have, all workplaces have a certain type of political flavor to them.
Of course they do.
And so there's always going to be people who get promotion or get benefits that you are going to feel like that they don't deserve.
Right.
Or that you're going to feel
why should I bother anyway?
Why should I bother trying if people who I feel like are not competent are getting more recognition or pay or whatever it is? And there's no escaping that. And that's true in any area in life.
Of course.
But it's definitely, the deeper you just get into life, statements like that become much more opaque, where it's like, I don't necessarily buy that at all. But it's constantly preached, even in the secular world, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. I mean, well, like you said, it's a bit self-serving, right? As a parent, of course, you want to tell your kids to tell the truth. As an employer, of course, you want to tell your employees not to lie.
or that hard work pays off.
Or that hard work pays off, right? Yeah. Man, we just got this quarter's numbers in. Nate, come to my office right now. What have you been doing?
Yep.
Chomping a cigar. Anyway. But the point is that nonetheless, the example I always like to give is Ozzy Osbourne. Ozzy Osbourne just amazes me. He's a dope head and a drunk who happened to court the affection of a record producer's daughter. Lucky him. How many other guys playing rock and roll were dope heads and drunks and never made it anywhere?
That's true.
And meanwhile, you got, he gets replaced with Ronnie James Dio. Easily a better singer than him. Easily a better singer. I would bet the rent money that Dio took care of himself better than Ozzy has taken care of himself. Dio dies of stomach cancer in 2010. Ozzy Osbourne, skating
somehow
along,
he's still alive.
Just sliding through life.
Did you see what he said like a week or two ago, where he said like, I think I only have 10 years left? I'm like, why 10 years, Ozzy? 10 weeks, man. Come on.
Man, he and Keith Richards. It's.
I just heard a advertisement for the Stones coming back through town next year or something.
Oh my gosh.
It's like, why? Anyhow.
I'll take my 75-year-old father to it. Oh, thanks, son. He's using the walker to get up the steps. Yeah, but it's anyway. But the point still remains is that I would claim for me those are faith statements that honesty is the best policy and hard work pays off. Because again, I'm not really sure how to test them other than I really don't know how to test them. What am I going to do? Live every man's life and consider every situation all throughout time.
You could view the past, but you could find examples of both for both sides. It
Sure.
being true and it being false. And then you have to say, well, what's my control here? Like
Yeah.
you could waste a lot of time trying to narrow that down.
Right. And I guess like even when you read history, right? Because you're the history guy. History is full of people doing both things, right? I mean, the people that I think of, Is Life Worth Living? That's a good one. Because you see people sometimes, for instance, what happens? Tragedy befalls them, and what happens? Screw it. They get bitter. They're not having it anymore. Booze and drugs and leave me alone and all that kind of stuff. And then you got guys like Viktor Frankl, who goes through Auschwitz and writes Man's Search for Meaning and just conducts himself nobly. And you have Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who witnesses the fall of Tsarist Russia, goes into the Gulag, and writes the seminal work that is instrumental to the destruction, to the bringing down of the Iron Curtain.
But wasn't like Solzhenitsyn in the Gulag for 5 years before he gave up communism? Like he was living as a slave, and he didn't give up his belief in Marxism right away.
No one gives up their belief in anything right away. Darn it. This is going to be the worst show note I've had to look up, but because there's 3 volumes to that text, and I can't remember in which volume it is. But yeah, he talks about when he was in prison, and then he began to go over the choices he made as a younger man, because I believe it was the listener will have charity on me. Only 65% of what I'm going to say is correct, but he began to think about what he did when he was an officer. He began to think about what he supported. He began to think about what he just sort of ignored and let go when he should have been acting in a contravening manner to it. So yeah, it took a minute, but the point is that he could have easily, just said, I was betrayed by friends. Life is unfair. It's unjust. Screw this. Bitter. But he didn't, right? And so all the point I'm trying to make with this stuff is with each of these things, that life is worth living, that you can either affirm or deny statements people make about themselves, that honesty is the best policy, that hard work pays off, It's not clear how you prove these things. However, how you answer the question changes how you act. And that's really the definition of faith, which is that faith is that on which you act for which you cannot posit a test.
And the action is the key part of our definition.
Correct.
And the one that we're going to be engaging a lot. People will say, I believe in the abominable snowman or Bigfoot or something, okay? I believe in the Bigfoot legends.
Chupacabra.
Like, great for you. How does that affect how you live your life?
Yeah, how does that
now,
change
maybe
it?
it affects
The lost city of Atlantis.
There's got to be a small subset of people who are Bigfoot chasers, and they've devoted their lives to it.
Yeah, in that case, it is an article of faith.
It is an article of faith, but for 99% of people who take a position on, or a strong position on Bigfoot, it's not really a faith statement because it doesn't affect the way they operate. But yes, I think the definition of faith as you're acting on something, it informs your values through your action is super important, and that is kind of. It's not necessarily the total basis of the show, but it's one of the most important definitions that we're going to have that we're constantly going to be putting back through the filter, right?
Well, it's important because, and this is what drove me bananas for so long within Christian apologetics, is people talk about, oh, we're going to prove the faith. That always struck me as odd because I thought, well, then it seems like you're trying to be science. It seems like you're trying to be a mathematician. It seems like you're trying to be a scientist. Which is fine if you are, because I am a mathematician. I love it. But then how are you different? Is the church different? Is a pastor different from a mathematician? Yes or no? Seems like they are.
If you've ever met a pastor, you know the answer.
Right, it seems like they are. And yet it's like they're trying to be a mathematician. I'm like, well, no, this isn't.
They try to be a mathematician sometimes when
right,
they feel like it's necessary.
Sometimes. Right.
And I guess what we're saying is that that's not necessary.
Well, but the key, the key in my own mind at least is that I had never seen a precise sort of division here or partition here. And so sometimes, or not sometimes, oh shucks, you know a bit more about Catholicism than I do, but we're both pretty paltry at it. Was it John Paul II that said faith and reason are non-overlapping magisterium? Where's that phrase come from?
Oh, it's probably someone from the 20th century. I'm not 100% sure. Now, Ratzinger, who was Benedict XV, he was like the theologian of the 20th century.
Right.
And he really pioneered. So what Catholics did was they kind of ignored some parts of theological inquiry, like since the Reformation.
Yeah.
Because their attitude was the church says what we need to believe and we just go with it. So Ratzinger was actually pretty influential from the perspective of bringing the academy back into the sphere of theology a little bit more. Not that there haven't been Catholic theologians for the last 400 years, but making it more of a prominent thing. So who said it?
I wasn't even close. It was Stephen Jay Gould,
okay,
the biologist. Oh gosh,
yeah,
we'll fix it in post.
That's all right. We'll leave it in there. And I mean, that's the important part of the show is we'll always fix our mistakes. We'll always put it in the show notes.
Well, yeah, that's what the show notes are for, right? Yeah, I'm not going to curate that.
We expect you guys to be entertained by the things that we clearly get wrong.
I'm not going to keep the Western canon in my head, for heaven's sakes. But here's the point then, is that coming to that realization that it really is the case, literally, that they're non-overlapping magisteria, because in the one case it's like, well, in what sense are they non-overlapping? It's one thing to just say it, right? Well, faith and reason, they're non-overlapping magisteria, or science and religion, they're non-overlapping magisteria. It's one thing to say it, but it's like, well, what do you mean? Like, in what sense are they non-overlapping? And in my mind, the sense in which they are not overlapping is that for science you can posit a test, and for faith you cannot. And this is why statements like, going back to Ronnie James Dio in his song We Rock, when it's all said and done, it's really all the same with just a different name.
But when it's said and done, it's really all the
It's not true. Because by definition, faith is that for which you cannot posit a test and on which you act. And often, when you act in affirmation of a proposition, you get very different results than when you act in defiance of a proposition. And it's not true what Mark Twain's character Pudd'nhead Wilson says when he says, faith is believing what you know ain't so. It's like, no, that's not right. I mean, of course, we understand the joke in that character statement, but that's not true because you literally don't know. It's not that you know it ain't so. You literally don't know, but you act as if it is true.
Well, I will say this. This has been a great, layout of the landscape itself. I think.
And one more time from the top.
Well, we have 3 parts of our foundation. We have facts, we have hypotheses, and we have faith. That informs our action, and that points to what we value.
That's it.
And
we just spent all this time to say that.
And so every single proposition that we're going to look at, we're going to put through that filter. And so when we're talking about something that you need to have some type of faith towards, and all these different things have aspects to it. When we talk about, for example, the existence of God, there are going to be aspects of that conversation that there might be a test for.
Yeah, there's going to be hypotheses in there. There's going to be faith in there.
And you're going to add all those things together to come up with an answer. And so all 3 of these things, facts, hypotheses, and faith, are going to inform that. And every single individual, whether it be me or Ian, it's going to look different for everyone else. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to give you a framework for that you can start to evaluate these things instead of counting on someone. I work with the youths at church, right?
Right. Yep.
And their constant thing that they do is they say, tell me what to believe.
Right. Yeah.
And it gets old, but you also have to be patient. If you don't want them to ask you for the answer, then you have to teach them how to find answers.
You got to be Socratic with them.
So you have to go through a process like this, and hopefully this will be beneficial for people who want to listen to us talk about all these different things.
Never mind if they want to listen to us. I hope it'll be beneficial for them to evaluate propositions in their own life as either facts or hypotheses or faith.
Are you trying to say you're more humble than me?
Yes.
Okay.
But not as humble as Moses.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you for listening. I am Ian.
I'm Nate.
And Petra will see you out.
This has been another episode of the Steel Creed Show on Earth as it is in heaven.